My son gave me a brand new laptop for my retirement party. It was a Tuesday in October, one of those gray afternoons where the maple trees on our street had already let go of most of their leaves, and the sidewalk outside looked like the floor of a cathedral. I remember thinking how thoughtful it was. I remember thinking I had raised him right. 14 days later, I was sitting in an RCMP detachment in Barrie, Ontario, watching a constable put my son in handcuffs. He did not look at me when they walked him out. I want to tell you how it started. I want to tell you because it started the way all catastrophes start. Not with an explosion, but with a small, reasonable-sounding gift wrapped in silver paper. My name is Gerald Fitch. I am 68 years old. I spent 37 years as a Crown attorney in Simcoe County. I argued cases in front of judges who terrified articling students. I cross-examined men who had practiced their lies for months before they sat across from me, and I broke every one of them. The law was not my job. It was my architecture. It was the thing I used to measure whether a structure would hold or collapse. I told you all of that because I need you to understand what it meant when I started doubting myself. When a man who built his entire life on evidence began wondering if he could trust his own memory, you begin to understand the scale of what my son did to me. My wife Ruth passed 3 years ago. Ovarian cancer. It took 14 months from diagnosis to the end, and I will not describe those 14 months because they are mine and hers and not for anyone else. What I will say is that the house in Barrie, the one we bought in 1991, the one with the wraparound porch Ruth planted with geraniums every spring, felt enormous after she was gone. Not large, enormous. The way a theater feels when the last audience member has filed out and the lights have come up and the stage is just an empty wooden floor. My son's name is Clifford. He is 41. He works in commercial real estate in the GTA, or so I believed. He has his mother's eyes and none of her patience. When Ruth was alive, she was the buffer between us. She understood how to translate his ambition into something I could respect and translate my caution into something he could tolerate. When she died, we lost our interpreter, and neither of us knew the other's language anymore. His wife, Petra, I never warmed to. She came from money, or the appearance of money, which I have learned is a different thing entirely. And she looked at our house in Barrie the way a property developer looks at a heritage building. Like something that had potential if you were willing to gut the interior. The retirement party was Clifford's idea. I had planned to simply stop going to the office on December 31st, give my colleagues a quiet handshake and come home. Clifford insisted on the party. He booked a private room at a restaurant on Dunlop Street, invited 30 people I worked with, ordered a cake shaped like a gavel, which I found embarrassing, and stood up at the head of the table and gave a speech about sacrifice and legacy that made 2 of my former colleagues cry. I was moved. I want to be honest about that. Standing there in my good suit, holding a glass of sparkling water because I no longer drink at events, I felt genuine warmth. He was proud of me. Or he performed pride so convincingly that I could not tell the difference. Looking back, I still cannot. After most of the guests had gone, Clifford carried a flat box to the table and set it in front of me. It was wrapped neatly. Petra was watching from across the room with an expression I could not read at the time. I read it clearly now. "You can't keep using that old machine, Dad," Clifford said. "It's running Windows 10. Half the government websites don't even support it anymore." He was right. My old laptop was slow and temperamental. Had mentioned it twice that year. I opened the box. Inside was a sleek, thin device, a Dell XPS 15, fast and clean looking. The kind of thing I would never have bought for myself. "It's set up already," Clifford said. I had Marcus configure it. Marcus was his wife's younger brother, who worked in IT support somewhere in Mississauga. "It's got a VPN, banking integration, everything you need. Your Rogers login is already in there. I synced your CRA account." I hesitated. "My CRA account? Dad, you're gonna need to file on your pension income, your RRSP withdrawals, the works. It's all linked, it's just easier this way." He spent the next hour at my kitchen table, that same night, walking me through the setup. He asked for my TD banking password, my Sun life insurance credentials, the PIN for my investment account at Raymond James. He called it simplifying. He said Petra had done the same thing for her own parents, and they found it an enormous relief. The words my mother's maiden name left my mouth before I registered I was saying them. He handed the laptop back with a smile. "Now you're connected. Call me if anything looks off." He kissed me on the forehead the way he hadn't done since he was 8 years old. Then he left. I sat at the kitchen table with the laptop and felt what I can only describe as a draft. The kind that comes through a door you didn't notice was open. 3 days later, I checked my TD account on the new machine. My checking balance was short $3,400. I stared at it. I pushed my reading glasses up. I stared again. The transaction was listed as an e-transfer sent on a Monday evening to a recipient identified only as PFC Holdings. I had never heard of PFC Holdings. I had not sent any e-transfer on Monday. On Monday, I had gone to the Barrie Public Library to return 2 books on naval history and come home to watch the early news. I had gone to bed at 10. I opened the transaction detail. Authorized via online banking. Device confirmed. The device was the laptop sitting in front of me. My first thought was fraud, an external breach. Someone had hacked the account somehow, despite the VPN Clifford mentioned. My second thought arrived a half-second later, and I pushed it away immediately. I was not ready for my second thought. I called TD. I was on hold for 22 minutes, which in my experience is what always happens when you most need to speak to a human being. When a representative finally answered, I explained the transaction. He put me on hold again. When he came back, his voice had the careful, neutral tone of someone who has been trained to deliver bad news without liability. Mr. Fitch, the transaction was authorized through your online banking profile. It passed two-factor authentication. A one-time passcode was sent to the phone number registered on the account. The passcode came to my phone? According to our records, yes. I looked at my phone. I scrolled back through my texts. There was the TD passcode, sent at 8:47 p.m. on Monday. I did not remember receiving it. I did not remember authorizing anything. I hung up and sat very still. I am a man who spent 4 decades building cases on the foundation of what can be proven. I know that the absence of memory is not the same as proof of innocence. I also know that I did not send $3,400 to a thing called PFC Holdings on a Monday night in October. But I was 68. Ruth was gone. And Clifford had mentioned, more than once in recent months, that he worried about me living alone in that house. He had mentioned, twice I remembered now, twice very specifically, that some cognitive decline in the early stages is so subtle the person experiencing it often cannot detect it themselves. The seed was in the ground. I could feel it. I did not call Clifford. I decided to wait. I decided to check the transaction record again in the morning, as if perhaps it would resolve itself, as if I had simply misread the numbers. I know how that sounds. I was a Crown attorney. I prosecuted men for wishful thinking. But grief does strange things to rational people, and pride does stranger things still. The next morning, the transaction was still there, and there was a second one with $200 to the same recipient, authorized at 11:03 p.m. the previous night. I had been asleep at 11. I drove to the TD branch on Bayfield Street. The advisor I usually dealt with was on medical leave. A younger man named, the nameplate said. Brad sat down across from me with the expression of someone who was trying very hard to seem unhurried. He looked at my account. He furrowed his brow. The transactions originated from a device consistent with your registered laptop, Mr. Fitch. And they cleared two-factor auth each time. I did not authorize them. I understand. He said it the way people say I understand when they mean I am not sure I believe you. We can flag the account and open a dispute. But I have to be honest with you. Biometric and two-factor verification together is difficult to contest. The system treats these as confirmed by the account holder. Someone else is controlling the laptop remotely. Brad looked at me for a moment. That would be a question for a cybersecurity specialist, sir. Has anyone else had access to the device? I drove home in silence. I went into the kitchen and stood looking at the laptop where it sat on the counter. It was charging, the indicator light blinking softly. Something about it, the way it sat there so still, so helpful looking, made my stomach turn. I picked it up and put it in the hall closet and shut the door. Then I called my granddaughter. Ingrid is 26. She is my son's child from a relationship before Petra. She grew up mostly with her mother in Guelph, but she spent summers with us, and Ruth adored her with a fierceness that surprised even me. After Ruth died, Ingrid and I had grown closer in the way people who share a specific grief sometimes do. She studied computer science at Waterloo, and now worked for a firm in Kitchener doing what she described as penetration testing, which I initially understood incorrectly, and then understood very correctly once she explained it. She was paid to break into corporate systems to find the weaknesses before the criminals did. When she answered the phone, I heard keyboard sounds in the background. Grandpa, everything okay? I need your eyes on something, I said. And I need you to not say anything to your father yet. There was a pause. How soon can you be here? I drove to Kitchener that afternoon, 2 hours on the 400 South and then across on the 401. The highway was dry and gray, and I drove under the speed limit the entire way, because something about the afternoon felt fragile, like a morning that had not quite finished deciding what kind of day it would be. Ingrid lived in a one-bedroom apartment above a dry cleaner on King Street. She had 3 monitors on a standing desk and a whiteboard covered in diagrams I could not interpret. She opened the door before I knocked because she had a camera on the landing. She looked at my face and did not ask how I was. Bring it in, she said. I set the laptop on her desk. She plugged a cable into the USB-C port and connected it to her own machine. Her fingers moved across her keyboard with the same economy of motion I remembered in the best junior lawyers I had ever worked with. No wasted movement. Eyes tracking something I could not see. 15 minutes passed. I sat in the only other chair in the room and watched the wall. Then she stopped typing. Grandpa. Her voice was careful. Who set this up for you, Clifford? And who is Marcus, Petra's brother? He works in IT. She turned to look at me. She had Ruth's coloring, the same pale blue eyes, and something in her expression right then was so much like Ruth's expression when she was deciding whether to tell me something difficult that I had to look away. There's a remote access tool installed on this machine, she said. It's a commercial product, but it's been configured in a non-standard way. Whoever set it up can see everything you do on this device in real time. Keystrokes, screen activity, banking sessions, all of it. I did not speak. They can also initiate transactions during an active banking session if you've left the browser open. The two-factor codes that came to your phone, the system can capture the screen notification if you have the banking app open, and the phone synced to the laptop through Bluetooth, which you would because the setup would have paired them. Clifford paired my phone to the laptop that night at the kitchen table. Yes, she said. He would have. The room was very quiet. I could hear traffic on King Street and the low industrial hum of something in the building below us. How much? Ingrid asked. $4,600 so far, in 2 transactions. That's low, she said almost to herself. That's a test amount. They're checking whether you notice. I had spent 37 years reading people across courtroom tables. I had learned that the moment a case becomes personal is the moment you become most dangerous to yourself. I took a breath. I set my hands flat on my knees. What else is on there? I asked. She turned back to the screens. Over the next 2 hours, Ingrid dismantled the machine layer by layer, the way a careful investigator dismantles a crime scene. Not to destroy, but to document. What she found was not complicated, it was methodical. It had been built by someone who knew exactly what they were doing and exactly what they were after. The remote access tool had been installed the afternoon before the party. It had a logging function that stored everything. She found the keystroke record of me entering my Sull login, my Raymond James credentials, my TD banking password, my Sun Life policy number. She found a script that had been written in advance, she told me, before I even touched the laptop, that would initiate e-transfers during low activity hours and route the money through a numbered company. PFC Holdings. She searched the company name in the Ontario Business Registry. It had been incorporated 4 months ago. The sole director was listed as a numbered company in turn, registered to a home address in Mississauga, Marcus's address. Your father doesn't know about this, Ingrid asked. I thought about that for a long moment. Clifford was ambitious and careless with money in the way that people who grew up watching money appear and disappear tend to be. He had called me 6 months ago asking to borrow $30,000 for what he described as a cash flow issue in a deal he was putting together. I had said no. I had said no carefully, the way you say no to an adult child when you want to preserve the relationship while still declining the request. He had not brought it up again. I don't know what your father knows, I said. Ingrid's jaw tightened. She looked like Ruth then too. We need to be careful, I said. If we tip our hand too early, the tool gets wiped remotely. The logs disappear, we have nothing. She nodded. She had understood this before I said it. I can isolate the machine, she said. I can build a sandbox, a virtual mirror of it. If anyone tries to access it remotely, they'll be accessing the mirror, not the real machine. They'll see what we want them to see. In the meantime, I extract everything and we build the actual record. How long? A few hours. Maybe overnight, do it, I said. I called Clifford at 7 that evening. I was standing in Ingrid's kitchen drinking tea I did not particularly want, playing the part of a man who had noticed nothing and was simply calling to say thank you. Dad, how's the laptop working out? Beautifully, I said. I've been on it all afternoon. Ruth's old emails are on there somewhere. I've been trying to find them. You know how I am with these things, of course. His voice was warm, easy. Listen, if you can't find them, let Marcus know. He can remote in and have a look. There it was. That would be wonderful, I said. Tell him I'd appreciate it. I might poke around a bit more tonight, though. Try to find them myself. Sure, Dad, don't stay up too late. I hung up and looked at Ingrid, who had heard the whole call on speaker. He'll access the sandbox tonight, she said. Yes, I said. Let him. We set up a simple loop in the mirror environment. My banking browser left open, a Raymond James session running, both showing correct balances, no activity. The sort of thing that looks like a retired man who fell asleep in front of his accounts. Plausible. Comfortable. At 11:17 p.m., someone accessed the machine remotely. We watched it on Ingrid's monitoring screen. The cursor moved with the small, deliberate movements of someone who has done this before. It navigated to the TD interface. It initiated a transfer. $8,000. Same recipient, PFC Holdings. In the real account, nothing moved. In the sandbox, the balance dropped and the transfer registered as pending. They think it went through, Ingrid said. Good, I said. Let them think that for a while longer. She saved every log, every session record, every IP address. She mirrored everything to a secure cloud backup and printed hard copies in 3 sets. One for us, one for the police, one for my lawyer. My lawyer. I had not thought of myself as a man who needed a lawyer in 37 years. The irony of it sat in my chest like a cold stone. The next morning, I drove back to Barrie. I went to the RCMP detachment on Sperling Drive, because financial fraud of this nature is federal jurisdiction, and because I was not about to walk into Barrie Police Service and be recognized by someone I had worked alongside for 2 decades before I had my evidence in order. I asked for a constable in the financial crimes unit, and I sat in a waiting room that smelled of disinfectant and institutional carpet for 40 minutes. The constable who finally sat across from me was a woman named Rekha Shabo. She was perhaps 40, efficient and careful. She did not look at me with the wariness I had half expected. She looked at the documents Ingrid had printed, and she looked at the log extracts, and she looked at the shell company registration, and she was quiet for a long time. "Mr. Fitch," she said, "are you prepared to press charges against your son?" "I'm prepared to press charges against whoever is responsible," I said. "I need you to establish who that is." She looked at me steadily. "Are you prepared for what that investigation might find?" "I was a Crown attorney for 37 years, I said. "I understand what I'm asking for." She nodded once. "Then let us get started." What followed was 12 days that I will not describe in detail because much of it is still before the courts, and because some of it I am not yet ready to discuss even with myself. What I will tell you is what became clear once the RCMP financial crimes team began working with Ingrid's evidence. Marcus had built the tool. That much was established quickly. He had the technical knowledge and his name was on the shell company registration. He had been the architect of the mechanism. Clifford had provided the access and the context. He knew my passwords, he knew my accounts. He had sat at my kitchen table and handed Marcus everything he needed. Whether Clifford had understood the full scope of what Marcus was running, or whether he had told himself it was a temporary loan he intended to repay, that is a question for his lawyer to argue. Petra had known. There was a message thread on Clifford's phone, discovered when his devices were seized, in which Petra had written the words, "The RRSP is the real number. We should move in January when the annual contribution room resets. No one looks carefully in January. My RRSP, my retirement savings." The account Ruth and I had spent 22 years building, adding to every February, adjusting the allocation conservatively as we got older. They had been planning to empty it. The total they had already taken in 2 test transactions was $4,600. The total they were positioning to take was, based on the messages, somewhere between $200,000 and $250,000. I learned this sitting in Ingrid's apartment on a Thursday evening, reading the summary Constable Sabo had sent to my email. Ingrid was at her desk. She did not say anything for a long time. "Grandma would have," she started. "Yes," I said, "she would have." We left it there. The arrest happened on a Tuesday. Constable Sabo called me at 8:22 in the morning to tell me they were executing the warrant. I drove to the detachment and waited. I did not go to Clifford's house. I did not want to see it happen on a front lawn. I waited in the same chair in the same waiting room that smelled of the same institutional carpet. And I drank bad coffee from a machine in the hallway. And I thought about a Tuesday 31 years ago when Clifford was 10 years old. And we had driven up to Algonquin together, just the two of us, and he had spent the whole afternoon teaching himself to skip stones on a lake so still it looked like hammered tin, and how Ruth had packed us a lunch with those thick turkey sandwiches on rye, and how none of us knew yet that any of this was coming. Grief and betrayal are not the same weight. Grief is blunt. Betrayal is sharp, but they stack. Sabo found me in the waiting room mid-morning. "It's done," she said. 3 arrests. Your son, his wife, and the brother-in-law. 3, I said. Petra and Marcus were at the Mississauga address. They're separate charges. I nodded. I finished the bad coffee. "Is there anything you need?" Sabo asked. "A receipt for those printouts," I said, "for my records." She almost smiled. "Of course." I drove home on the 400 North. The trees along the highway were bare by then, the last of October finished with itself. And the sky was that particular shade of pewter that Ontario does better than anywhere else in the world. I drove under the speed limit the whole way. When I got back to the house on Barrie, I went to the hall closet and took out the laptop Clifford had given me. I carried it to the workshop in the garage, the one where I used to build model ships when the boys were young and the cases were too heavy to carry to bed. I set the laptop on the workbench. I stood there looking at it for a while, then I took it to the recycling depot on Hartley Lane and turned it in at the electronics window. On the drive back, I called Ingrid. "It's done," I said. "I know," she said. "Zabo texted me." "Thank you," I said, "for believing me, Grandpa." Her voice was steady. "You didn't need me to believe you. You were right. I needed someone who knew how to prove it," I said. She was quiet for a moment. "Come for dinner, Thursday. I'll make the soup Grandma used to make. The one with the lentils. She never gave me that recipe," I said. "She gave it to me," Ingrid said. "Apparently she didn't trust you with the proportions." I laughed. It surprised me. It was the first time in a long while. That was 6 months ago now. The case is working its way through the courts. I do not attend the proceedings. I have given my statement. I have filed my civil claim to recover what was taken. I have a lawyer for the first time in my life who is not me, and I try to follow her advice even when my instincts argue back. Clifford sends messages through his own lawyer asking me to consider the impact of a criminal conviction on his children, on his career, on his future. I read them once and file them without responding. My grandchildren from that marriage are young. When they are old enough to find me, I will be here. That is not something his lawyer needs to know. What I want you to understand is this. I spent 37 years in courtrooms. I know what predators look like. I know how manipulation works and what it costs its targets. I believed I was immune because I understood the mechanism. I was wrong. The mechanism does not care how much you know about it. It works on you anyway, particularly when it comes wearing the face of someone you raised and loved and were trying to find a way back to after a grief you were both still standing in. The laptop was a door, and I opened it. What was waiting on the other side had been planned for months before my retirement party, before the cake shaped like a gavel, before the speech about sacrifice and legacy that made my colleagues cry. I am 68 years old. I still live in this house. The geraniums are coming back on the wraparound porch because I planted them in April, which is something Ruth used to do, and something I did not know I needed to do, until I found myself at the garden center in May holding a flat of them. Not entirely sure how I'd gotten there. Ingrid comes for dinner most Thursdays now. We disagree about everything except what matters. If you are watching this and you have a parent or grandparent who lives alone, who is still sharp but who is also still grieving, who would do almost anything to maintain a relationship with a child who has learned how to weaponize that need, please watch carefully. The gifts that come with setup instructions and requests for your passwords are not always gifts. And if you are the one living alone, trusting someone who has given you reason to trust them, trust your receipts, trust your calendar, trust the entry you made in your own handwriting at 9 in the morning on the day someone tells you you were somewhere else entirely. Your memory is not the unreliable one. If this story reached you, please share it. Hit the like button, subscribe to Storm Vengeance, and tell me in the comments where you are watching from tonight. I read everyone.